Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Crossroads of Cognizance, the place where we have created a live discussion and community space that incorporates magic and spirituality and energy. If this is your first time joining us, you're going to want to hit that like and subscribe button. If you're on YouTube, you're going to want to follow us on Facebook if that's where you're seeing us. And we definitely want to hear from you during the broadcast. So click on that video so you can jump in with us, because today we're going to be talking about the magical life. There's a lot of connotations to that phrase, and we're going to go through a couple, both of us being practiced energy workers, magical people, professionally, as opposed to as a hobby, and what our magical lives look like as well. So if you're in the comment section with us today, we want to hear about your magical life as well. How involved is it? Are you precise, or are you feeling in the flow? What does that look like? But before we get too deep into the conversation, some introductions are in order. So I am Dahlia Rose. I'm the founder of the Conduit School, and I serve my community as a healer, a teacher, a conduit for high vibrational energies. I teach and guide my students through spiritual development, energy courses, meditation, counseling, and my ultimate goal is to change the face of healing alongside the culture of it and what it looks like in this world. But I'm not doing this alone today.
My name's Katrina Rasbold. I rub eggs on people. I'm I'm half of crossroadsoccult.com, and my husband and I have run this business for quite some time. We make handmade magical products that we offer on the website. We also offer things like spiritual cleansings, readings. What else do I do? Spell work for people, things like that. And I'm sort of semi-retired right now. We ran shops for a very long time, and now we've toned it down to just working at home, keeping our business online and at festivals. And I've also written 30-something books on different aspects of magic and witchcraft and Wicca and things like that, energy manipulation.
So, one of the things about having a magical life and being a support system is the wild things that you can say that you do, like rub eggs on people. I'd also love to point out every show, well, I would say most shows, if you check Katrina's background, there's going to be another magical something happening back
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Like one show, she had to have had like 7 candles burning
Oh,
people. So also the candle setting. And I imagine, much like me, Katrina, you're also doing some of those things for yourself as well.
no. I literally almost never do magic for myself.
Really?
Really. And that's kind of a change. The only time that I actively work magic on my own behalf. Now, this is excluding magic I do for my kids, whether they know it or not. But for me, myself, if I'm starting some really important undertaking
Mm-hmm.
that that I really need to go well, that I need to just be smiled on favorably, then, which is rare, then I do that. And what else? I did during the year that I was having surgeries and lots of medical concerns. I worked quite a bit of magic because that was a really dicey time. But I almost never do magical work for myself. And honestly, it's a point of privilege that I don't. And it's because for decades I did magical work on myself, and it brought me to a place where I'm living the life I wanted to live. There really isn't a lot for me to magically tweak. Every now and then I'll have worked on somebody and feel like maybe I had an impact
Hmm.
from something I pulled off of them. And then
Right.
I'll do a reversing candle or a an uncrossing candle to kind of clear myself out. But I don't do a lot of self work. I literally can't remember the last time I did a reading for myself. And some
Oh,
of that is because I don't trust myself as much as I trust you. So if I need a reading, it's just like, hey, when you have a chance, can you look into this? But
yeah.
I mean, how long ago has it been since I did that? You know,
Oh,
it's usually
probably
just
last year.
2 or 3 times a year, I think.
Yeah.
So I don't, and that's like my dirty little secret, is that because of all of the aggregate magic that I did to create the life that I want to live, it's a privileged place to say I don't have a lot of stuff I need to work on. Now, that being the case, if shit gets real, the cauldron's coming out. But so far so good.
Well, and so in the context of doing work for ourselves, I could probably say about the same. Um, Except I guess on my side of things, um, I will do a lot of energy work on myself, in the way of trying to keep myself in like a particular state so that I don't fall too much one way or the other in terms of like um, fear, ego, or otherwise as I, kind of traverse my path. Um, and try to find balance that way. But like as far as manifesting, I really don't, as much as I support others in doing that, I really just kind of allow things to happen. And maybe that's the big dirty secret behind the veil, is like in the magical life you get to a place where you're just like, oh, okay, well, I don't know that I need that personally, but I'm definitely here of service. So
Another thing we look at too, just very briefly to that thought, is when you have done this for decades, you reach a place where you recognize that some things are better just taking their course
yeah.
and not magically intervening. And so I've had enough excellent outcomes from trusting the process that I really only get in there and tweak if something is really feeling like me tweaking it as part of that process.
Mm, mm.
And so that's another reason that I think I don't do a lot. Now, with the coven that I work with, we manifest every year. We still follow cusp tradition. And I had to really stop and think about, what do I want to manifest this year? And the thing is that when you begin to consider what you want to manifest, especially with big goals, you tend to have those deficits come very strongly into focus. So
Mm.
that can come with a pretty rough week sometimes.
Rough week,
but
rough
you
month.
but you want to just really be tuned in with the things that you feel need to change and what you want divine support involved with making those
So
changes happen.
this is a great place to kind of look at like what is a magical life then, because I feel like as far as manifestation, it does have its own energetic, like manifesting is going to happen whether you're active in it or not, and what you're talking about is the opportunity to play an active role in it. Doesn't necessarily have to take a magic path. It can take a healing path, which is what, like when you said those deficits can come, to me that's the healing part. It's like, oh, I'm my feathers are being ruffled because I need to work through this in order to see through to my goals. So how would you define a magical life, Katrina?
That's, of course, going to be really individual to each person as
For
to
sure.
what that looks like. But to me, it means that you reach a tilting point in your life where more of your day is devoted to magical processes and thoughts than not, than to just going through. I know that this is a very um, jaded perspective that I take, but I've worked with this long enough that it feels like that before I saw the world this way, I was on this hamster wheel effect where I was
Mm,
just going through the motions of what mundane life required, to the point that spirituality kind of, I think it was the centrifugal force of the hamster wheel that threw spiritual life out away from me. So that it
mm,
was just something I saw or grabbed, kind of like the brass ring coming around every Sabbath, where Oh yeah, I'm gonna wear my Ren Fair outfit to circle this week, and it'll be very magical. And we have that in all paths. I mean, when I was Christian for many, many years, you always had those people that are in church every Sunday morning, the most devout of the church, and they're just jackasses the rest of the week. So it's not limited to magical life. I guess spiritual life is a more succinct way of putting it. But when you are having an overwhelming influence of spirituality, whatever that looks like for you, as a focus in your life, and I don't think we ever intend that. I don't think we ever set out to say, I am going to make my life magical, or I'm going to make my life more spiritual. Now, we might say, I want to give it more importance in my life. I want to build that part of my life. But it's kind of like being a crazy cat lady. Nobody, I don't think, really sets out to be a crazy cat lady. You just get a cat, and then a couple more cats come, and then you've got a friend that has two cats, and they're moving away, and they don't have a home, and they're gonna have to take it to the shelter. So you take in those cats just to foster until somebody else, and pretty soon you've got like 14 cats, and you love them all, and you're a crazy cat lady. And it's the same thing with spirituality. I think that it's something that just evolves and happens when you open to the energy of spirit. And sometimes it can just start to fill you up more and more to a place where you now can't imagine that not being there.
I would say I can definitely get behind that sort of definition, and like you said, it's very individualized for me. Not is it only the magical thinking and awareness, but the symbols that come, and maybe that falls under the magical thinking, right? So, being able to walk outside and receive some sort of influence from the day, or even just waking up and being like, okay, I have a sense of the energy of the day and meditation or what have you, that starts to bring the magic, and then it ebbs and flows from there. Magical life may also include rituals and being guided by those invisible forces and allowing those to uh, let you know if you're headed down a balanced path or not. I think that as far as like the decision, I think it is always a decision, but I think it's important to distinguish, because I think these lines have been blurred. I think it's important to distinguish between the chosen magical life and then like the chosen healer magical service life. Because I think in this day and age, at least within the last 2 years, I shouldn't say this day and age like it's been decades of it, but in the last 2 years, those two things have been blurred. And so people think that they have to be of service in order to have a magical life. Like, oh, okay, I was pulling cards for myself. It must mean that I'm a tarot card reader and I need to be doing this on a public platform in order to get off that hamster wheel that you mentioned. And it's
Mm.
not the case. It is, I'm friends with a witch who, when I met her, I didn't know she was a witch. All I knew of her was that she was a nurse, and she did all these amazing things, and then one day she was like, do you want to come over for the full moon ritual? And I was like, the what? And we called in the 4 quarters.
Quarters.
Yeah, and we did all these things, and I was like, this is amazing. You just live this way? And she was like, yeah. And in quiet, not even, I wouldn't even say in secret. I believe that that distinction allows us to have access, because the magical life is available to everyone. The magical life is not a, it's not a privilege to have because a reader told you you're a healer in this life. It is the same thing that celebrities and the wealthy access all the time because they just feel like they have a right to it, and the rest of us don't really know. So
One of the things to party off of what you're saying, and I think this is part of what you're saying, is people tend to think they don't fully live a magical life until they have an immersive career in the magical life. So they think that they don't live a magical life unless they are a tarot reader 8 hours a day, or a magical shopkeeper, or a Reiki master, or a metaphysical teacher. They think they have to be doing something that is at least tangential to their spiritual path in order to have that full immersion. And that's simply not true. Now, that being said, it's easier if
Yeah.
I have a magical shop where I have all this magical stuff around me. It's easier to live a fully immersed magical life than it is if I were a secretary in an office. However, you can be a magical secretary, you can be a magical dentist, you can be a healer who is a psychotherapist. There's all these different ways that healing can present. And it isn't all about healing, and it isn't all about service, and it isn't all about your job. It's about a way of engaging the world, and a way of seeing different layers to life than what you see in a mundane existence.
Absolutely. And something that comes up here as people start to, maybe our audience members, if this is you, would love to hear from you and know. Um, Sometimes when we step onto the magical life path, right, we find magic and we're like, yes, I want more of this. Um, there becomes this fixation with routine. And like, okay, I've got to make sure I hit all the moons, and I've got to make sure that these particular Sabbats are honored, or I light that candle, or whatever the case is. And I think the true magic really starts to unfold when you allow personal intuition and feeling to come into that process. So you can be the magical person that doesn't always work with the full moon, and doesn't always have to, manifest because the planets are in, Mars is in Aries and it's exalted, and you don't have to go through those processes. It's about, I think, a real magical life has flow to it, has intuition. But if you feel like, in order to get into the rhythm, and maybe because, like, as I'm saying this, I'm like, oh, well, I guess routine can come in if you're fighting through old, maybe church-based belief systems, right? You're like, I'm going to do these rituals to release this. But, um, you know, magic expands. The magical life definitely opens up to just taking that personal journey for self.
I think it's about growth as well. So when
Mhm.
we are first learning to write, we have to do the drills of making an entire page of A's, and learning, we have to trace over where the arrows are showing us how to draw a 5. And we have to go through those routines and rituals in order to learn how to successfully create the symbols that make up our language and our way of communicating. And so I think that it's similar with a magical life, where when you first start, you need the rituals to teach you how to tune into the different elemental energies and the different energies of a person's aura, and Reiki transference and different things like that. We need those rituals in order to learn how to make that connection and speak that language. But
Mhm.
when we get fluent with it, we don't, the rituals are wonderful, and don't get me wrong, but we don't always depend on the rituals quite so much in order to establish a good connection, I don't think.
Right, I would agree. And that fluency can come faster than folks anticipate. Um, I think ingrained in our culture is the learning piece. Like, you constantly need to be learning. If you don't have certificate in hand, have you really completed the quest? Um, and that fluency is really about self fluency, I think. Um, like you said, it's about growth. Which brings us to brings us into this space of what commitment looks like. So, um, you know, In terms of your magical life, personally, Katrina, what does commitment look like for you?
I think at first it was a commitment to learn as much as I possibly could.
Mm,
I really promised that to myself. And then as I evolved and got into year 30 and year 40 of doing what I do, it became more of a commitment of knowing that in some form I would always be doing this. And I think part of that for me is the changeability of life and affiliations, because like I said, I was Christian for a very long time, and got a lot out of it, enjoyed it. I still have reverence for aspects of it. But I reached a place in my development where it was no longer at all conducive to what I was doing and wanted to do. And so
mm,
something I had previously committed to through baptism, and which is a strong energetic lock, and other things, suddenly was not a player in my life anymore. And so I had to undo that commitment and move forward to a different kind of commitment. And so I think that for me, it was reaching a place in my life where it was a matter of saying, there's not going to be a time in my life that this is not what I am.
mm.
And the self identification became the commitment that said, no, this is what I am and who I am. That is who I was before. This is who I am now. There's not going to be huge changeability in this. There might be development and there might be expanded knowledge, but this is it. This is as good as it gets. And so I think that was the lock on my commitment. I also had to really make a strong commitment. This was specific to me. It's not something everybody goes through, but to really honestly honor the divine guidance when it comes. And that was more self-preservation than anything, because I learned over time that if you don't, you're going to end up in the same place, more beaten and bruised. And if you had gone along with it the first time. And I was very fortunate to partner with a person who is just as dedicated to that divine guidance. So it's not something I ever have to explain or apologize for or anything like that. It's just, if one of us says, look, I'm being led to, that's it. That's what's happening.
Right.
So that the commitment that I have with Eric is also an important and integral part of the magical spirituality in a day-to-day life, because I am also integrating the input of another person's entire spiritual construct
Mm.
into my life. So the commitment for me is multifaceted, and really has a lot of really strong and spindly arms and legs.
What it sounds like, and this is beautiful, and relatable. It sounds like it evolved over time. So, if I was to come to that question about commitment, I can definitely find places where I was committed to achieving a goal, right? My spirituality started, my conscious spirituality, because I was a heavy churchgoer previously. You know, I my spirituality began in the depths of my divorce, and eventual separation, and so my commitment level to that was, okay, how can I squeeze this in so that my soon to be ex isn't like, what are you doing, and kind of
Mhm.
coming in and invading my sacred space or sacred time. And then getting out of that situation, my commitment grew to learning and learning about energy work and things like that, and crystals and everything like that. And then the commitment expands from there into, okay, this is who I am, this is what I'm teaching. And I love what you said about following that divine guidance piece. For me, I would be speaking to percentages, and as far as the commitment level of following that divine guidance. Like, now it's like, if I am committed to following this divine guidance at least 85 to 95% of the time. um and I think for people who are questioning their magical life and coming onto this path, that piece of partnership is so integral. Like, what is your family doing? What are your partners doing? Your magical life can still exist around these things, um, but don't count yourself out as not committed. Understand what commitment you are actually able to have. I mean, I've heard the gamut of excuses from, I should be doing more of this and I should be doing more of that when it comes to magical execution or energy work. And it's just, folks, stop and look at your life to say, does my life allow for this? Now, if you desire better, that's one thing. But if you are feeling like God or the goddess or the universe is not going to support you because you didn't get out of bed at 4:44 in the morning, this is not a thing. That does not make your life more magical getting up at spiritual number times.
God, I hope not. And you talk about should be, I should be doing this, I should be doing that. And I hear that an awful lot from people. However, my response to that is always pretty much the same, which is if you have chosen a specific life, and you have, I mean, if you have a partner who is not supportive of your magical endeavors, you chose that partner. And if you live in a house and you have a lot of friends over or family over who would not be supportive of seeing certain books out or seeing certain pictures on the wall, you chose to have them over. You chose to be public in that regard. And so, as far as what you should be doing, I should be, making room for this, I should be making room for that. Maybe not. If you are choosing a life that doesn't support what you do, that or what you're thinking you should do, then you have made a choice that says no, you shouldn't be doing that. And there's no harm, no foul. This is always a matter of you get to pick, you get to decide. And nobody has the right to say, oh yeah, you really should be doing that. You get to figure out what your life looks like. Now, for me, with my first husband, he was absolutely not supportive. He was a staunch atheist. And so my altar was a little bookshelf in the garage. And so when Eric first came over and saw the bookshelf in my garage, he said, "My God, this is really beautiful." And he lived in the Air Force barracks, so he, didn't have a lot of space for what he did. But he said, "This is really beautiful. I love your collection of books that's down here. I love your altar. This is really amazing. It's in a garage. What is that about?" You know? And so that made me really think about, did I want to be in a relationship where I had to hide an integral part of me in a garage?
Mm.
And the whole rest of the house was the way that my first husband wanted um, the house to be set up. So, and telling the story that way makes it sound like I actually left Eric for Paul, and or Paul for Eric, and that's not what happened. But he just happened to have been there at the time and saw my altar. But we do reach different points in our lives where it's a critical deciding point of, okay, what is going to have the priority here? And no matter what you choose, it's the right choice. But don't lament what you chose.
That is the magical life. Accepting your hand in everything that's occurring around you. I've seen people kind of, talk about their children and how they can't do certain things because they have kids. And I'm like, um, I took that on at first. So it's funny the contrast between my two kids, 12-year-old and, well, 13 since last Monday, but 13-year-old and soon to be 6-year-old. They look at magical things, crystals, as just a normal part of life. And part of having a magical life is making certain things normal as well, I think. And so, yes, on the one hand, what kind of partner and support do you have there with your kids? Have the conversation with them to say, like, oh, this is what's happening and why it's happening. I think it's easier to do that with kids than it is with a partner because they're already in a space of magical thinking. You know, when I talk to my 6-year-old about portals, he's like right there with me. He's like, "Yeah, mommy," you know. And when I jumped through this portal when I was born, and I'm like, "Okay, tell me more before you forget it," you know. So um, there is this oneness and this openness to having a magical life. It's not always positive either. I think it's important to say that part of having a magical life is accepting, you know, that there are going to be negative things that occur as well. Heavy parts of my magical life involve cleansing, just because of the work that I do. And it's not a, you know, go get my toes done self-care day. It's very ugly and like gross at times, depending on what's going on. So, you know, a magical life is like a 360-degree experience as well, but should be shared. I think, well, no, I'm not going to say should be shared. It can be shared with everyone in your life, including your pets.
And there's also the other direction of thought, which is that if you're doing, if you're living a magical life and it is secreted, that it's more powerful.
Oh,
That if and this was so much the case when we were having to avoid prosecution and um, being outed as witches, and that was in our lifetime, that you could lose a job
yeah,
for the negative press and that sort of thing. So, or lose your kids. I mean, it could be a child safety issue, a CPS issue too. Fortunately, we're not there as much now as we were maybe 20, 30 years ago. But there is also a line of thought, which is that which isn't broadcast, that isn't put out there, is more powerful. And so, everybody has to find their way
yes.
of working this, and their way of integrating a magical life into what they do. Or you can die at age 90 having only gone to a full moon ritual once a month and not even thinking about it the rest of your life. That's okay too.
Yeah.
I would not say that that is living the magical life. I would say that that is having a social club that meets every full moon. But to each his own. You've got to find how that spirituality fits into your life that you have created, and then own that.
I love what you said about you know, well, let me take a step back because my thoughts went back to your bookshelf, right? And like how you can have power in secrecy. It reminds me of like it, you know, like the ancient times when you would have closed doors practices because if it got out in the world, it may be misused. And now today the greatest danger, because it's already being misused by multiple people, the greatest danger you can have to your magical practices is like um you know, somebody coming into your house and sneering at your altar and like sending negative energy to your crystal grid and stuff like that. And I can recall
It's pretty yeah.
I can
Pretty
recall
insignificant in comparison.
right. I
You're
can
not
recall
usually going to be burned at the stake or anything like that. So
no, no. And in my classes, like Crystal Grids class, we talk about putting a silk sheet over your crystal grid or underneath it to allow the silk to protect it, and then energizing it every now and again. Or if you really like, if you're really closeted, I love that you had a whole garage instead of a closet. But you know, if you're
oh, there
closeted,
was a car in that garage too, and luggage and bins. This was one half of a little wall that had a bookcase on it. And, one thing, when you talk about the power of something, even secreted, my first husband, because of a lot of experiences that he had when he was growing up, was a very controlling person.
Mm.
And so for me to say I'm going to do this and that, this is what's going to happen, when it was something he had such blatant disrespect for, and was why he ultimately divorced me,
Mm.
was a really big step. I mean, because he when he was getting the divorce said, I can't respect somebody who talks to things that aren't there, and I can't respect the fact that you leave the house, every couple of weeks in your bathrobe, and go out and see people, meaning, ritual robes.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah. So that was, we look at that and say, oh, that's really an awful thing to say. But at the same time, to him, that was how he felt. And that was a change that I instituted during our marriage. It's not as though it was negotiated between the two of us, or that he had known that when we got married when I was 16. It was something that developed in me over time, so that it was a new factor. And he had every right to say, I didn't sign on for this. This does not work for me.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah. So me doing that was taking a huge step. Even that little, secreted bookcase in the garage was a big deal.
It's a start, though. It's a step towards you. And this is a great space to talk about like how the ebbs and flows of a magical life and their impact on relationships. Anybody that would walk into my shop and be like, "Oh, I just started my spiritual journey," I'd be like, "Okay, are you married?" And they're like, "Yeah, we've been together 15 years." And I'm like, "Okay, just
Well,
be prepared that at the end of this, at least at the end of your starting phase, you will be a different person. And if your partner is not developing alongside you, and I've seen both, I've seen it work where the partner takes up their spiritual path, and maybe they're not identical, but at least both are moving in a direction, versus one person goes and thinks, oh, this person is just going to let me be my magical self and do what I do and not even pay attention to me, not realizing that there are some very primal things about us that attract us to each other, and those change when you integrate new ways of being, when it's whether it's religious, whether it's magic, whether it's energy of some kind, or even job changes, because those things, if you really love them, if you're really passionate to them. I was listening to Ram Dass earlier today. um he talked about when you really love something, you open up to it, you open up your heart to it, and then in turn, it impacts you. And one of the fastest things I've seen that happen with is a magical life or spirituality. Um, I was married to somebody who thought that the only psychic people on the planet were prophets. And if you were anything but, you were talking to the devil. That's not my reality. And as I started to engage with my intuition a bit more, I too got I didn't sign up for that, and again, I love that you said that he was within his full right, because it's important to acknowledge that when you are moving through what could be classified as a magical life, this is what happens with people. Your cycles with people will have their ebbs and flows, and you may start to get into a place, I know I have, maybe others have as well, where people come into your life for a very, very, very specific reason, as opposed to you just pulling people along for the ride. And that reason isn't it isn't for what do I want to say, it's not like you're using them up. It's not that. It is, the healings that come, the lessons that come, and the it like the people that stay the longest, the people that are part of your, what people say, your soul tribe, like those people are very few, as opposed to this culture where we feel like we need to be friends with everybody. It becomes, I think, a very layered system. and those relationships may disintegrate or fizzle out and end, and you can go through a grieving process, but also you'll have this realization that, like, okay, you know, they were here for this trajectory of my life, and now I'm going in a different direction. I think that also is part of
Yeah.
having a magical life.
And when we're specifically talking about partners, that becomes a big conversation about your magical life, because the integration of your partner's spirituality into your lifestyle is going to have a huge energetic impact on your spiritual immersion. And when we marry somebody, it's a big deal, because it's you're making a promise to that person, in theory, unless you have non-traditional vows, that you are going to be with that person forever, and that you're going to love that person and support that person forever. And that's our cultural thing. That's what we do. It doesn't have to be that kind of promise, but that's frequently the idea when you marry somebody. And the problem with that, from an energetic standpoint, is that you're making that promise as the person you are that day in that moment.
Mm,
And when you are 10 years down the road, you have probably changed a great deal, and so have they.
yes.
Hopefully, you've both changed a great deal. And I've been very fortunate in that over the 26 years that Eric and I have been together, as and we're both very different than when we met, very different. And we've just been fortunate that those uh, changes have melded well together and have often instigated change in each other.
Mm,
So, but I mean, that could change in 5 years or 10 years. I think it becomes less likely, but it's absolutely possible. Whereas if you already have challenges between you, it seems like that sometimes as you develop and become more of yourself and more of who you're meant to be, those challenges are going to become increasingly more apparent.
right. And there's going to be a strain, there's going to be a pull. Resistance shows up. So from what you're saying, I'm gathering this, like, this thought process that, it's important, if you're going to set up for a magical life, to be open to evolution. I mean, I think even if you don't have a magical life, relationships should evolve. You should not expect to be married to the same person for the rest of your life. We're not even the same day to day.
I think
Um,
we hope. I
yeah,
think that we choose somebody, we want to have a deeper bond and connection to that person. We want to ritualize and legally solidify that union. And I think that most people come into that process with very high hopes and strong expectations. But I really think that when it comes to evolution of the individuals and the union, that changes are not just, you know, something you think about. It's inevitable. It is going to happen. You are not going to be that same person. If you are, then you stopped growing because or when you got married.
right.
And so we really need to think about the long-term implication of integrating this person into our relationship. And when so many people, like, I mean, myself, I got married at a very young age, then I got married at an older age. And we don't always take those things into consideration. We just know we have a bond with this person, and we want to spend as much time as possible with them. We want to integrate them into our lives without thinking about, is this really a good thing? I mean, is that full immersion and integration going to benefit both of us energetically? We're just going by what we feel and what we want, and that's not always the best solution. Like you said, we have people that come into our lives for specific reasons, and often those reasons are teaching us lessons or bringing us into contact with certain shadow aspects of ourselves that we need to resolve. That does not necessarily mean we need to marry that person and be legally bound to them for an extended time. But
Right.
yeah, there's sometimes that we have to think, like you were saying, am I going to be married to this person forever? That's my intention. I don't want to imagine my life without this person in it. But is it realistic in expectation?
And that comes with so many things. And it's important to say here, as a magical practitioner, as an energy work practitioner, like Katrina said in the beginning, you don't always think to just reach for cards or some solution. I think there's space in the magical life to get, um, again, Katrina said this, where you're just like, oh, let's see what happens. I just kind of,
This will be
um,
interesting.
right. I recall, in the beginning stages of my journey, reaching out to my astrologer and being like, okay, hey, so this is what this is our layout. What can I expect? And then now it's very secondary, like it's very specific, and I may not reach out at all to find out, how me and a person can co-create, or what obstacles will be, or if it's worth. I mean, I get that question a lot, in people that are exploring spirituality, is, is it worth it for me to be with this person? And I tend to be of the thought that, yeah, you're going to get something out of this. So, if you feel compelled to take the journey, instead of looking for that sort of forever situation. But
And Eric has a good way of looking at it. He said, you make a choice every day. Every day you choose to be there or not be there. And it's really about, is there more good than bad?
mhm,
And is there enough good that it fulfills what you need to have happen in that relationship? And it's kind of like, when we talk about, I'm jumping topics here just real quick. When we talk about what you were saying about, in the beginning, we're doing all the things. And I'm calling the astrologer. I'm getting all the right rocks. I'm doing all this. It's kind of like when you have children, and for your first child, you're like, I am going to document every day of this child's life. I'm
right.
going to take a picture of them in a similar outfit every single day.
I'm gonna play
And
the classical music.
we're going to play the classical music. We're going to buy the organic baby cereal. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. I'm going to make my baby food. Just you got this whole plan, and you do that, and it's great. But I had 6 kids. By the time I got to number 6, I've got like probably 3 baby pictures, and he he ate Cheetos and drank Red Bull. It's just, it all winds down a little bit.
Right. 100%. But that brings us to the last aspect of this conversation: is the magical life choice, or is it a calling? And I
Yikes.
I think it's both. Um oh, you said yikes.
Okay.
What are you?
Okay. I would say this. I would say the magical life is a choice. The calling comes when you are creating a vocation or an avocation
Yes.
of that spiritual life. So it's a calling to be a healer, it's a calling to be a reader. It's not a calling to integrate energetic spiritual work into your life as a social worker or as a nurse. Your calling then is to be a nurse, and your calling is to move energetic work into your nursing. So it becomes, I think when we talk about a calling, it's more about, okay, what are you doing with this beyond just living the magical life? So what does that become? How do you become of service? So I
Mhm.
think the calling is the framework of your service if you ever go into service. And some people don't, and that's okay.
Exactly.
But the choice is, this is what resonates with my spirit for for a connection with the divine or a connection with energetic powers.
It's like the choice between, attending church and becoming a pastor. you know um I This is what I meant by it can be both. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that Again, I think magic is available to everyone, and some people are very conscious about using it, and others are intermittent, and it's woven into smaller sections of their life. And then when you start answering calls, you are either going to answer them in a mundane way, and which is fine. You know, you can go through therapeutic options, you can go through holistic options, you can do your yoga, you can, and I'm saying that as maybe that's not necessarily classified as a magical life, but it is a choice for conscientiousness and health versus I'm just going to let life happen. There are people that are of that belief system. And then, the calling comes in when you're like, okay, I have this magical thing going on, or my friend has this magical thing going on, and I can address this with energy work. But even then, as a practitioner who felt called to do this, um, I don't always address or have this like expectation that I'm going to have to do energy work on people when they ask for my help. I'm very like, if you don't ask me, I'm not going to just be like, oh, okay, I'm going to send you energy. I'm very specific. If you're like, I can recall being in conversations with people and they'll be like, oh, I'm having a hard time. And I'm like, yeah, that's terrible.
Yeah, you are.
And there's like this awkward
Yeah.
silence waiting for me to be like, oh, I'm gonna send you energy work, or we're gonna come over and we're just gonna, like Katrina said, we're gonna rub you down with an egg. And and that does not define a magical life. It doesn't even define magical practice or energy practice. It is, I think it's very much about listening to the call. If you're going to go that route. But I think it's both. I think that a magical life, an energetic life, magical thinking called me away from certain things. It called my awareness to certain things, but I had full choice. There was no point where I had to take the Reiki class. I had to start the candle magic or study under particular people. It was a full choice. Now, I might have, at the time, I think if you would have asked me at the time, I would have been like, no, I have to do this. I feel it in my soul. There's a stirring. If I don't do it, I'll explode. But that was still a choice.
It
And
was, I really want to take this class.
right, yeah, I giggle at those times now because I'm like, I just don't feel compelled to take so many
But
things.
I think it's also that we want to legitimize our desire to learn that. And we may
Yes.
have a very intense desire. And if we say, oh no, my soul is telling me I'm being called, then it legitimizes our extreme interest in doing that. And one thing I want to also point out that's been my experience is, but when you receive a calling in the energetic life or the spiritual life, it's not always benevolent. There are some people that their calling is to go through the internet and police people's comments and make sure they're giving the right answer and saying the right thing and citing the right, articles. And that's not always a nice thing. That's not always an enjoyable thing. But at the same time, the person is feeling compelled and called to write the misinformation that's out there in the world. And so, yeah, you might have a calling, but think about whether it's, I don't know, necessary or kind.
Even callings are a choice. Yes. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there can be a level of this reminds me of we had a conversation, I think it was last year, about not listening to guidance and how it can impact the body, like the physical impact on the body, and how the body can start to have dysfunction and all these things. And even as we're having this conversation, I'm like, oh, well, what level of choice is there? If you felt like you needed to police somebody's comments, or you might start to get energetic flu or a cough, or something going on, how much of that was your ego being like, well, your mom told you always had to speak up and now you're not doing it, and choice, 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 choice. as opposed to, oh, wait, I'm not being kind. What's Heidi saying here? The people who most need to think about whether their calling is necessary or kind are the ones least likely to think about it. I think that's true. I think that's true. I think they completely go on impulse. Um, but not always, you know. I mean, blanket statements. Never like to make those, but um, as far as a magical life and what we've covered today, uh, a magical life can start with discovering some aspect of yourself. Usually we say something like discovering your gifts, and then you're like, oh, I need to do something with this. So, we've had magical life defined as conscientiousness and awareness. We've had it defined as engaging with life in a very specific and magical way, bringing in symbolism, rituals, being guided by invisible forces. At the same time, we've talked about how magical life is your own practice. It's going to look different from person to person. It's neither fixed nor is it always flow. There's going to be things you're going to reach for specifically, and then there's going to be times when you're like, I'm going to take my hands off the steering wheel and see where the car goes. Um, you know, in the comments section, we would love to hear about your magical life. How do you engage with it? Do you feel like there needs to be a level of consistency or otherwise? What have your experiences been? And if there was anything you'd like us to expand upon within this conversation, we'd love to hear from you about that as well. But for now, I mean, you know, uh, oh, and the last part that I forgot to mention is choice. You all have choice. We all have choice as far as the magical life is concerned. That's bringing to mind people have been like, I don't want to get too magical because I'd have to give up X, Y, and Z. I know mediums that drink. I know magical people that get high on a regular basis. You really don't have to give up anything. It's all choice. Um, and so, with those choices, with that awareness, we thank you for joining us today. This was a magical conversation, and we hope you got something out of it. And we look forward to seeing you guys next time on Crossroads of Cognizance. Have a great night, everybody, and we'll see you. Bye, everyone.